Hello, my name is Ronald Heller. I'm going to give you a small demonstration of the Spark project for compliance. And we're going to pick this up at the horizon scanning part of the process, which basically means there is a list of documents coming in. Every 12 minutes or so, there's an update. And what we find here is there are documents being prepared in this list that need to be processed by the team. So this is the first document that I want to show you in the demo. And what you see here is we've got the original right here. This is the original PDF of almost 70 pages that is describing this new piece of legislation that we need to process. What the engine did is basically make sure that we had all the rubbish from that document filtered and we have a clear view of everything that's in there. And this is what the legal team can pick up and process and basically analyze which parts are important for the bank to process in the application. What we can do now is if we go to the main menu, no updates here yet. Well, what we will do is we are going to create a new project. So I'm going to create something called demo project 3, and every project has a deadline. So this one has one as well. Going to create this project. Now, an important part of this project is that we want to not only process those documents, but we have a team that is responsible for doing this. And the team members have different roles and responsibilities in there. I am the policy creator in this case, which means that I will do the first parts of it. I will analyze some of the documents, but I also need people that will, for instance, review my documents, um, look at the process itself, and then there's a domain owner that is able to validate the actions in the project. So I'm going to add these 3 members to my team. Okay, now the team is complete. We can go back to our project, which you find over here. This is the dashboard, and the dashboard of this project 3 in this case, shows you where the team members are defined, but also some of the documents in this project. And at the moment, there's an empty project. So what I can do is go to the document list that we just saw and search for it. And we have all sorts of filters for you to use. So it basically enables you to find documents based on topics, the relevance, the data that's in the document itself, the metadata, if you will. So I'm going to pick this document and add it to my project number 3, and add it. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. So what's happening now is that this document is being processed and it's being looked at by various services. One of the things that I can do now is just open it. So this is the document view of Spark, and it has that document that we just looked at. But what you see is that it identifies sections in this document. And the whole document is here. If I go down, you see it's loading all the necessary content elements, as we call them. And I know for this file here, we can load even more content. So this whole document is loaded completely dynamic, just to make sure that we get everything, but not everything at once. Now here, this is an interesting part. There's an icon for this specific section. What has happened is that while the document was being loaded, there's a natural language processing engine that is analyzing the text, and based on the rules that this engine knows, it basically does a suggestion for us to say, this is something I think is interesting. This could be a requirement for the bank, a bank requirement, as we call them. Please have a look. So the legal team, instead of having to do everything manually by themselves, are being supported by this digital legal service, if you will, by this engine. So we click on it, and then I, as a policy creator at this moment, can look at the text and basically decide if the engine was right or not. It just helps me in doing my work. And what I will do now is I will ask my team members whether or not they agree, just like I do with this engine, that this is a requirement for the bank. Hi, officer. I think this indeed is a requirement. As soon as I click on submit, comment on this piece of text is being stored in my project. And I will just have to see if the officer thinks exactly the same. Okay, so it's a couple of minutes later now, and the officer has looked at the text, and indeed, we both think that this is a text that we need to define as a requirement. Okay, so let's continue. There are possibly also pieces of text, sections in the document that the engine did not recognize. So if you go down a little bit further, we see here a section where the engine thought this is not a requirement that the bank needs to take into account. But once I read it, I think this is indeed something that we need to look into. So there's also the possibility to do manual tagging of a requirement. Once I click on this section, there is a button over here that says define requirement. So what I can do now is basically tell the system this is a requirement that you need to look into, and this is it, right? This is the only thing you need to do. You see that the text changes of color. We know now that this is a requirement that we will handle further down. Now, the other view on the document that is interesting to look at is this one. This is the requirement view. So these are the two requirements that we just identified. From this view, it's more easy to select the requirements. This is the one that I just manually created. And on the right, we see the possibilities to actually submit this one. So I have to submit it for approval. And in this case, I'm going to select policy creator and can type a text here to specify why I think this needs to be picked up. This is an important requirement. Submitted for approval. And there it goes. It's now submitted for approval, so they can review it and have a look at it. For this demo, what we did is basically give me all the rights, so I don't have to log in and log out all of the time. So what you see here now is that I have all the rights to also not only submit requirements but also approve them. But normally this would be a different role, or at least this is configurable, so you could specify which roles you want in the system and what their permissions are. So I'm now going to approve it. Yes, approve the requirement. There we go. So you see here, there's a trace of the things that happened. It's been approved. It's been submitted for approval. You see when this happens. You see who did this, and the commentary that was typed. As soon as the requirement has been submitted, we can define an obligation for this. So the requirement is the um, piece of text in the original document. The obligation is actually describing what to do with the requirement for the organization. This requirement needs to be processed in every product. Something. We're going to define the actual obligation, and what you see is that we switch views because we can now go further into detail about this obligation. So this is basically a linked obligation to the original requirement, but from here we are going to define what this means for the organization, what the obligation actually means for the organization, and which risks are identified for this, which controls we are going to put in there to counter the risks. So I can submit the obligation again, and I can create new obligations if I want to. For now, I'm just going to submit this, assign an approver again. Please approve. Again, this could be different people with different roles having different permissions. I just want to show you that the trace of every action that we do is available in the system. So you can see who sent it for approval, who actually approved it, etc., etc. From here on end, we are going to define risks, which I can do here, and then all the way down to the actual controls. So let's define some risks that we see for this obligation. Again, this is a small button. For risk, the screen is a little bit different. I see a risk of fraud here. And what we do here is we select a risk level 1 and a risk level 2. And we basically put some extra information in here to help us find these risks linked to the obligation later on. Submit it. Okay. So this basically is the same type of interaction all the way down to the controls. So that's why I want to stop here for now. I just want to show you the way up again because we are at a risk level here, and you see it's linked to the original obligation. So we can go to that obligation, which was this one, and that is linked to the original requirement. So we can just basically go back to the original document again, where we see everything. And so it's a complete trace of the risks, the obligations, the controls to the actual original text that we see here. Okay, so this was just one document. So what if, and I'm going back to home now, there's my project 3. I'm working on this project, I'm just going to library, and in this case, I'm going to filter, just my list. What if there are multiple versions of a document, right? You want to reuse the work that you've already done, and you want to see what the difference is between the two. So I've got my document version 1 over here, which I can view. That is this one. And we also see that there is a second version of that document, which is a little bit different. But based on this view, it's really hard to tell what the differences are. So what we can do is the following. And again, we use the natural language processing engine to help us to identify the differences. What we basically do is we've got version 1 over here, and I'm going to drag this one over here. I'm basically saying this is a new version of that same document. Once I click on it, the system knows that this is actually one document, but it has two versions. So when I go to that document again and I click on View, this one is the main one that I'm using. Now, all very good. What we want to see, of course, is if we use this in a project, how that actually works. So I've got this one, and what I will do is I'm going to add it to my project. Here we go. Yes, I'm sure I want to add it to my project. Going back to the dashboard, I can open up project 3. And what we will find in the documents is there is this new document now here. When I click on it, I need to process it. And what you see is that there is a button over here that I can use, which says View Changes. And in the View Changes view, we see the differences between the previous version and this version. So red, of course, means this is deleted, and the green one means this has been added in comparison to the previous version. This technology can be used in all sorts of ways. This is a diff in terms of what is different in the first version and the second version, but this is also being used to identify if certain text that you enter, for instance, to create a new requirement or obligation is very similar to something that you've used before. And in this way, we identify which obligations can be reused again or which risk descriptions can be reused again. So this is where I want to stop the demo. This was a short introduction to the compliance framework called Spark. Thank you for your attention.